We live in a world where crazy things, incredible things, and downright strange things are a reality. Lucky for you, we've gathered some crazy stories, interesting facts, and scary knowledge into one easily digestible video. These aren't things that your average everyday Joe just knows. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy amazing things you should know. A lucky lady. Let's get this thing going with a fact not only interesting, but amazing as well. Vesna Volovic was definitely one of the luckiest people on the planet at one point in time. She fell from a pretty incredible height, 33,330 feet, and she holds the record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute, according to Guinness. Now, she didn't accomplish the crazy feat on purpose. On January 26, 1972, she was actually on JAT Flight 367, a flight that would be ended by an explosive in a briefcase. The explosion caused the plane to go down, and Volovic was the only survivor of 28 people on board. Her skull was fractured and hemorrhaged. She had 3 broken vertebrae, one was pulverized, 2 broken legs, numerous broken ribs, and a broken pelvis, and she spent several days in a coma. She ended up not remembering the incident at all and continued to work in a desk job at the airline, as well as become a national hero. A truly short war. Have you ever heard of the Anglo-Zanzibar War? Well, of course you haven't, because the thing only lasted between 38 and 45 minutes, making it not much of a war at all. This little war was fought between the Zanzibar Sultanate and the United Kingdom on August 27, 1896. The whole reason for this conflict was because the British didn't like the guy who rose to power following the August 25th passing of Sultan Hamad bin Tuwaini. The Brits wanted Hamad bin Mohammed to take control, as he was more favorable to British interests, but instead, Sultan Khalid bin Bargash took power. He really angered them too, because, at the time, anyone who was going to rise to the Sultanate had to first get the British consul's permission, and Bargash did not. The Brits then gave Bargash an ultimatum: stand down and get out or die. Well, Sultan Khalid bin Bargash ended up sort of getting away in the end anyway, but the British got their guy in power in 38 to 45 minutes. Want to hear something weird? Did you know that some turtles can basically breathe through their butts? No lie! There's even a scientific term for this interesting talent. It's called cloacal respiration. Many animals have what's called a cloaca, which is an orifice that acts as an opening for the urinary, reproductive, and digestive tracts. They expel both urine and feces through the orifice, as well as use it for breeding purposes with others of their kind. Then there are these turtles, most of which are great divers that have air bladders that are connected to their cloaca. These air bladders can somehow filter oxygen from the water after pumping it through the orifice, allowing these creatures to survive underwater for long periods of time. The more you know. There was once a man from Rome. Caligula was a fairly well-known emperor from Rome that ruled for just 4 years back in AD 37 to AD 41. He was part of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which was the Roman Empire's first ruling family. He handled the pressures of being an emperor for a short while, before becoming cruel, sadistic, and by some accounts, insane. He was eventually taken out in an attempt to restore the Roman Republic. The attempt failed as his uncle Claudius was made the next emperor the day Caligula died, thus keeping the Julio-Claudian dynasty going. But during his reign, before he passed, Caligula did something crazy by any standard. He made his horse, Incitatus, a priest, and promised that he was going to make him a consul. How many extra body parts? Well, for the species, we guess none. Compared to humans, a few. We'll start out by telling you that an octopus's blood is bluish and that they have 3 hearts to pump this bluish blood around their 8 tentacled bodies and to their gills. They can also have up to 9 brains to be able to control their movements fully. A central brain has control over their central nervous system, and there's a smaller brain in every tentacle to control its movement. So not only do they have extra appendages, they've got extra internal parts too, making them some of the strangest and more interesting creatures out there. Walk like a Greek. When you think about female Egyptian rulers, who comes to mind? Cleopatra? That's because she was one of the most famous female rulers Egypt ever had. But you probably didn't know she wasn't quite Egyptian, did you? Yes, she was born in Egypt, but she was actually part of a dynasty of Macedonian Greeks and was the last and final ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Ptolemy I Soter grabbed hold of power in Egypt in 323 BC following the demise of Alexander the Great. The Greek-speaking dynasty, which included Cleopatra, ruled for almost 300 years until 30 BC when Cleopatra died. Crying like a baby. If we could all cry like babies, or at least newborns, things would get a whole lot less messy. That's because newborns can't actually shed tears because they don't produce them yet. They won't begin producing tears until they're somewhere between 1 and 3 months old. So when they cry, it's because they're trying to communicate. At that very young age, the crying is to tell their parents they're hungry, uncomfortable, tired, frustrated, or lonely, among other reasons. Sounds like the same reasons we might cry, although they have the upper hand by not shedding liquid from their eyeballs. Shrinking like an old person. We're kind of talking about all over here. Most people have noticed that as people age, they tend to get a little smaller and frailer. Do you know why this happens? Well, there are a variety of reasons. One is because they lose muscles in the torso, resulting in a more stooped over posture. Another is because discs in our spines, the ones between the vertebrae, tend to dehydrate as we age and compress, causing us to lose some height. That might be a little strange, but something even stranger is happening without us even realizing it. Our brains tend to shrink as we get older, and so far, we seem to be the only animals this happens to. And certain regions of our brain, like the hippocampus and frontal lobe, are more prone to shrinking the older we get. That's not the only thing. As time wears on, human brains as a whole are getting smaller and smaller. Once upon a time, our brain size was on the rise, but not anymore. Now the opposite is happening, and in the last 20,000 years, humans, on average, have lost what equates to about a tennis ball-sized amount of their brain mass. The bee's knees. This has nothing to do with knees, but it has something to do with bees, sniffer bees to be exact. Sniffer bees and sniffer wasps are trained using Hymenoptera training, which allows them to sniff out all kinds of things. Their olfactory senses are about on par with those of a dog, giving them more detection power than any human could ever wish to possess. The only problem is, an individual bee can only be trained to detect one scent, unlike sniffer dogs, but good thing there are so many of them, for now. These sniffer bees have been trained to identify more than 60 different scents, including things like cancer, tuberculosis, methamphetamine, uranium, TNT, gunpowder, C4, and Semtex. Pretty crazy, huh? Aren't those for women? So, these days, high heels belong mostly in the women's realm of fashion, but once upon a time that wasn't the case. The history of high heels can be traced as far back as the 10th century, when men of the Persian cavalry wore them so that they could make sure their feet would stay in their stirrups. They even became a kind of mark of wealth and status, as owning a horse was, and still is, expensive. So those wearing heels were thought to possess significant wealth. Both men and women wore them during the medieval period, as it helped them get out of the trash and filth on the streets. It wasn't really until the 1900s, when young men in the Second World War would be shipped off, accompanied by their posters of pinup girls, most of which wore heels. That's when the relationship between female sexuality and the heel became more firmly established, and it's pretty much stayed that way ever since. Not the liver. It's been pretty well established that most living things need some form of vitamin A to survive, and humans are no different. But us humans, we only need a little bit, but it plays a pretty significant role in many things, including reproduction, immune response, eyesight, growth, and tissue formation. Foods like spinach, eggs, carrots, some meats, broccoli, and milk help us to replenish our supply. But you best be watching out for polar bear liver. For adults, the upper limit that a person can tolerate is set at 10,000 IU, but signs of toxicity start showing up in the 25,000 to 33,000 IU range. Polar bear livers happen to contain about 34,000 to 35,000 IU per gram, so even a small amount could ruin our day or even our lives. They get all of this vitamin A because they eat ringed and bearded seals, both of which store a ton of vitamin A in their blubber and livers, so it's probably best we don't go snacking on them either. Fish out of water. The next time someone says, like a fish out of water, you'll probably have a whole new perception on the phrase. There is a fish that can not only breathe while underwater, but it can breathe air and survive on land. No, we're not talking about mermaids here. We're talking about full-fledged real-life fish. There are just 6 species of lungfish today, and they live in just 3 places: Australia, South America, and Africa. Although they were more abundant from the Triassic period on up to more recently. They were sometimes referred to as salamander fish historically, which would make sense as some salamanders live on land, while others spend their lives in the water. We've seen some pretty strange, very interesting facts so far, and we still have one more to go. But first, we'd like to ask, what are some weird things that you know that you think everyone else should know too? We're always up for learning something new, so throw your knowledge up in the comments for everyone to read. 1. Should have been called Stalin's hop. Back in the day, the Soviet Union used censorship as a weapon and a tool and basically used it to change history, much like some of the things that occur in 1984. During political purges, Stalin would have figures that were purged away, erased from photos and other visual mediums. This guy would seriously just have photos retouched so that someone who once appeared in them no longer did, which had to be a serious mind-bender back in the day. Sometimes, if they couldn't erase somebody from a photograph or from footage, they would simply destroy the film and call it a day. Keep in mind, Stalin was in power from the 20s to the 50s, so this was long before Photoshop. It's like Joseph Stalin was a forward-thinking, future-seeing, maniacal dictator. If you enjoyed this video, do us a favor and give it a like. Subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on any of our informative uploads, and be sure to watch this next video we picked out just for you.